Hey guys, first off I want to say thank you so much to everyone who sent me your kind words and support for my last video. It definitely wasn't easy sharing my story, but I do feel so much better now that I did it, and I really do think that 2015 is going to be my year. So again, thank you for everyone's love and support. It means the world to me. So today I wanted to start off with talking about nutrition labels. There's a lot of controversy around nutrition labels and a lot of confusion. So I wanted to kind of clear that up for you today so that way you can make educated decisions when it comes to eating. So the number one thing I get when I talk to people about nutrition labels is that they like to look at the calorie count. And in all honesty, calories are not all that important, and that's actually the last thing that I look at on my nutrition label. I'll probably get a lot of people angry about me saying that, but that's a topic for another day. So the very first thing that I look at on a nutrition label is my ingredients. I want to make sure that there's nothing weird or wonky that I don't know what it is in the food that I'm consuming. I want to make sure that I'm educated about what I'm putting into my body. So for instance, when I was looking at this Sabra classic hummus cup, I saw that the very last ingredient on here is potassium sorbate. And potassium sorbate is a preservative that actually can be really harmful to your body long term. So for me, I realized that I would rather have a different variety of hummus that does not have the preservative than to just eat this out of convenience, because it's not so good for me. A fun fact about Sabra hummus, if you buy the garden fresh variety, it actually doesn't contain preservatives. They don't advertise it on the label because they still want you to buy the classic, but just a fun fact. Another good example is on here, it says sucrose. Well, sucrose is just a fancy word for sugar. So that means the very first ingredient on this box of gluten-free brownies is sugar. So that kind of leads me into the next thing that I look at on the label, which is my sugar count. So if sugar is listed as one of the first 5 ingredients on the food that I'm consuming, then I probably don't want to eat that product, because that means that there's probably a lot of sugar in it. They always list ingredients in the order of what's the most in that food to what's the least in that food item. So if sugar is the very first ingredient, that means this box of brownies is primarily made up of sugar. So if we look at the gram amount, every 4 grams of sugar is equal to 1 sugar cube. So for instance, Cliff Bars. Cliff Bars have around 32 grams of sugar. That's like sitting down and eating 8 sugar cubes. That's actually more than a Snickers bar. So just because it's got protein and it's marketed as being a healthy food, it actually can contain far more sugar than something else that is considered an unhealthy food. So you want to make sure that you're reading that label. For me, I shoot for foods that are under 8 grams of sugar. That way I don't exceed the 25 grams of sugar a day amount that they say that we should eat, or stay below that. So the next thing I look at on my label is my sodium count. So sodium should make up under 16% of your daily value, and you'll see that little percentage amount on the right-hand side, or it should be under 500 milligrams of sodium. So why that is if you think about it, you're combining a bunch of foods that maybe have 30% of your daily value of sodium into one meal. Well, if you add 3 different items that have 30%, that means you've got 90% of your daily value for sodium in one food item. So it's going to be really easy for you to go over that exceeded amount. So we want to make sure that we're really careful of that. Too much sodium can cause problems like high blood pressure, bloating, and a slew of other issues. So want to be careful. Then I like to look at my fat. So I never want to eat foods that have trans fat. Trans fats are bad no matter what. They're bad for your arteries, your heart, everything. Stay away from trans fats. Saturated fat is one of those things that's highly debated. Sometimes there's good saturated fat and then there's bad saturated fat. So good saturated fat would be things like coconut oil. Bad saturated fat would be things coming from like croissants or buttery pastries that aren't so good for you. So just be careful of the kind of fat that's in your food. We just want to stay away from trans fat and limit our intake of saturated fat depending on where it's coming from. Then I like to look at my handy dandy fiber amount if I'm buying something that's going to be my carbohydrate for my meal. So for instance, bread. If you're buying a piece of whole wheat bread in comparison to a sprouted whole wheat bread, the regular whole wheat bread that's been highly processed probably has very little fiber, which means it's not going to really fill you up, because fiber helps us stay full and satisfied over a long period of time because it slows down the absorption of our food and the sugars. Whereas if you're having Ezekiel's bread, which is sprouted, it's actually going to contain a lot more fiber. So it's going to give you that full and satisfied feeling, so you have less cravings. So always looking for a high fiber content. And then I like to look at my protein. Each meal I try to shoot for around 20 grams of protein, just to make sure I'm giving my muscles all of the nutrients they need to grow, build stronger. That way I can get leaner, because the more muscle you have, the more fat you burn. But it's not like a make or break thing for me. Just trying to make sure that I at least combine my meal into having at least 20 grams of protein. And then if I'm trying to decide between two different foods, say I have this vegetable broth and I have another one, and pretty much the label is the same. Well, if one of them is fortified with vitamins, like this one has 25% of my vitamin A for the day, it's got 2% of my calcium and 2% of my iron, and the other one is not fortified with vitamins at all, then I'm going to choose the one that's got the good stuff for me, just because why not? And then if everything else is the same, if my sugar count is the same, my fiber, the vitamins, all of that good stuff, then I look at my calories. But that is the only time that I look at calories on a label. So what we learned today is the first thing you want to look at is your ingredients list. Always know what you're putting into your body. Make educated decisions. Secondly, make sure you're checking your sugar count, your sodium count, to make sure that you're not getting too much of the bad stuff. And then if you're worried about, is this going to leave me full and satisfied, we want to look at our protein and our fiber count. And those are the most important things to look on a nutrition label. Of course, there's many other aspects to it, but that's just kind of my basic how-to. Of course, we should be eating more foods that are not in packages and cans, but in case something happens and you just gotta resort to one of these guys, then you wanna make sure you know what you're doing. Thanks for tuning in with me today, and I hope that you all learned something. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to write below. And you can also check out my website, strict-fitness.com, to find more healthy recipes and tips and tricks from me. So have a wonderful day.